Good evening.
Good evening.
It's been a while. I don't like when work gets in the way of coming in, that's for sure. The whole day of the week and everything's all messed up right now. It's been quite a bit of time, so I'll do a quick review on what we've gone over the last 2 weeks in the class I did. So as a quick refresher, first lesson we went through was, what is providence? We defined what providence is, how it relates to miracles, how it's different. We went into how God provides for each and every one of us. From there, we went over various different examples in the Bible as well. The most recent one, we went through Joel. We went through the army that God provided for and used in His Word or in His will and in His plan in the Old Testament. Originally, this was supposed to be the last lesson, but I realized there was a lot to cover, and I didn't want to rush it. So instead, we're going to go over 2 more examples tonight, and then hopefully next week. Tonight we'll go over Ruth and see how God provided in His promise towards salvation. And then hopefully next week we'll dive into the story of Joseph. And then the ending will be the same, the application of the New Testament as the last lesson. So tonight, we're going to start off and spend most of our time in Ruth. We'll also look in Leviticus as well to see how the actions of Ruth and the laws and choices that were made in the story of Ruth, how they actually fulfilled the old law and how they follow God's plan. So we'll start in Ruth chapter 1. So as a quick overview, the entire book of Ruth is a providence in the sense that it shows how God worked through Ruth to continue the lineage of King David. So up until this point, we can see in the story that it seems like the lineage through Ruth and through Naomi was going to fall apart. As a quick overview, and we'll look through the verses as well. Naomi was the mother-in-law of Ruth. Her son was Ruth's husband. And we can see that both sons of Naomi, they pass away. And so it seems like everything dies out. Naomi, the mother-in-law, she's older in age. She wouldn't really be able to have a son again. And then we can see how Ruth's choices, in that devastating moment, how her choices help impact the ability to bring about King David later on. She chooses to stay with her mother-in-law rather than go back to her homeland. So starting in chapter 1, forgot to open it, sorry about that. So Ruth 1. So we'll look in the first few verses, and I'll skim through chapter 1 as our reference. So we can see in chapter 1, verse 1, that there was a famine. This kind of plays into the cause of Ruth's husband's death and the brother as well. And we can actually see even the interesting context of they're in Bethlehem, which is an interesting time as well. And we can see that Moab, which was Naomi's husband, had 2 sons. So these were part of the lineage that we can look at in Matthew, following then to Boaz, which we'll later get into. And then verse 2, we see that the 2 sons were Milan and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem and Judah. So that's the actual patriarchy of the lineage of David and Jesus. And we can see that they entered the land of Moab and remained there. Later on, you can see further down in verse 4 that they took the Moabite women, so Ruth as one of them. They took them as their wives, and they lived there for about 10 years or so. And then following on, we can see that they both died in chapter 5, both husbands. So Mahlon and Chilion died, and the women were bereft of her. The woman, so this is Naomi, the mother-in-law, lost her 2 children and her husband. And then we can see that Naomi arose with her daughters-in-law, and they might return to the land of Moab. For she had heard in the land of Moab that the Lord had visited his people in giving them food. So they departed from the place where she was, and her 2 daughter-in-laws with her, and they went on their way to return to the land of Judah. And here we can see 2 different choices made, and they're interesting in how God ends up working through them later on. Naomi encourages them, return each of you, and this is verse 8, to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, that you have dealt with the dead and with me. May the Lord grant you that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, no, but we sure must return with you and your people, with you to your people. But Naomi said, return, my daughters, why should you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Return, my daughters. Go, for I am too old to have a husband. If I said I have hope, if I should ever have a husband at night, and also bear sons, would you therefore wait until they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is harder for me than for you, for the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me. And they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah, I think it's Orpah. I don't want to misinterpret. Kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And she said, therefore your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her God to return after your sister-in-law. So we can see the 2 different choices are made by both of the Moabites, both of the wives. One chooses to stay, and one chooses to go. Ruth shows a lot of loyalty as you go further in the chapter. Do not urge me to leave you, return back from following you. This is verse 16. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. When you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me, and worse, if anything but death parts you and me. When she saw that she was determined to go, she said no more. And so throughout the rest of this chapter, we can see Ruth decides to stay. And this is a key pivoting point in the rest of the story of Ruth. And we can see further on in chapters, and that's what we'll focus on, how the story plays out, and how we can see God provided to the whole nation, honestly, through Ruth and her decision. Another key point, too, as a side note, for personal study, is Naomi, as a name, it means sweet, or caring, or it's a positive kind of tone of sweet. But then we can also see that there's this bitterness and grieving in verse 20, where she says, do not call me Naomi, but call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. It's a separate study, but it's an interesting one to go into. Mara is a complete opposite of bitterness. So she's pretty much saying, don't call me by my name, because my life and how it went by, and the grieving and losing her husband and her sons, it causes her to be bitter. And that's pretty much the whole general backstory before we get into Ruth's story in Is there any questions so far? That was kind of quick. Any input, anything? Okay. So where I wanted to start tonight to look at is going to be in chapter 2, starting in verse 3. So specifically, we start, this chapter 2 is where Ruth meets her future husband at this point, Boaz. And if you look in Matthew, you can see Boaz is the next part of the lineage of King David and Christ. And so looking in the first few verses, we can see in verse 1, Boaz is related to Naomi. It's the next closest relative. That's going to be a key point that we look at later. He's a man of great wealth and has a large family. In verse 3, it says, "So she departed and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the portion of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Emma." What's a key part in this meeting in chapter 2? So we finished up in going through the story of the grieving and the losing of the husbands. We can see that Ruth is now with Naomi, stayed with the mother-in-law. What's a key point that sticks out in verse 3?
She has other relatives,
Okay.
right? And we just met Boaz.
Okay.
Well, the field that she wanted to glean happened to be Boaz's.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So that happenstance, that's a key point. Anything else? It kind of reminds you of what we brought up a lot in Philemon, right? That perhaps. So in this instance, we can see that Ruth is a foreigner. She's a Moabite. She chooses to go back with her mother-in-law. And she's going there to find food. That's purely the intent of survival. So we can see she happened to be in the land of Boaz, the next of kin. It appears to be a random choice, but there's a heavy emphasis as we go later in the story of God possibly working through it. Is there anything else that sticks out in 3, or we'll follow up in verse 4 as well? And somebody actually wouldn't mind reading 4 if you don't have anything.
Read 4.
Yeah, chapter 2, verse 4.
Now behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And they answered him, "The Lord bless you."
So what's a key aspect that sticks out now in verse 4, continuing the thought that we had in verse 3. So first we can see that Ruth happens on the land of Boaz. That was something else interesting. In this case for me, when I was looking through this, there's a lot of eye-opening stuff that I don't think I'm just excited to get to, so please let me know if I'm rushing. In verse 4, we can see that Boaz shows up at just the right time. He could have been there before, he could have been there after Ruth went through, but he happened to show up just at the right time as Ruth was in that land. So the timing as well was an interesting aspect of what I was looking for. It's an immediate, well-timed encounter that allowed Boaz to notice Ruth's character and later on provide protection in the story. We can see that he notices what kind of person she is and how she cares for her mother. So looking at verse 4, and then now continuing in 5, it says, "And Boaz said to his servant who is in charge of the reapers, 'Whose young woman is this?' The servant in charge of the reapers replied, 'She is a young Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from the land of Moab.'" So already he's intrigued. If you think about it, it's probably because she looks different from the rest. She's a foreigner. And that starts that process of intrigue of he starts to notice her character as somebody who cares for her mother. So anything that sticks out in that as well. Just anything at all. What kind of character do you think Ruth has if she's able to leave her whole land just to take care of her mother? How does that stick out?
It shows that she was caring enough to make sure that Naomi was taken care of.
When you look through the lineage of King David and through Jesus, all the way to Jesus, you can see a lot of those godly characters that are always projected through that lineage. A lot of the key people, they have that character that sets them apart in the stories. And how they conducted themselves. So that's just something I started looking into as well. So all the key people that you see throughout the lineage of the Old Testament, it's interesting to see in retrospect the pattern that God shows in the people that He looked at. So looking further, there's a few different aspects to look at. What we'll look at is the Mosaic law and the framework and how it actually incorporates into Ruth and her story. I encourage you guys to study through Ruth more in depth too outside of here. I'm just going to kind of skim through a few different aspects of it. So we looked through in chapter 2 in Ruth meeting Boaz. There's a lot of key aspects to that also are an interesting layout of fulfillment of the law. But further on, then you can see in chapter 3 when Boaz is going to redeem Ruth or help her out in her situation now that she doesn't have a husband. Is anybody familiar with the old law, I forgot how to pronounce it, the Gaol law? G-A-O-L. In Leviticus, there's, G-O-E-L. I did write it down. It's the legal statutes of the Pentateuch. And a lot of key aspects in how Boaz takes care of Ruth in this instance and then becomes her husband. It also sticks out in how it's a fulfillment of the law and how it makes sure that the lineage of King David continues. So if you look, what are some key things that Boaz does for Ruth? We'll start with in chapter 4, actually. Let's see. It is. Sorry, I lost my spot. In chapter 4, verses 1 through 8, if somebody wouldn't mind reading that.
Now Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there. And behold, a close relative of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, "Come aside, friend, sit down here." So he came aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. Then he said to the close relative, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, sold a piece of land which belonged to her brother Elimelech. And I thought to inform you, saying, "Buy it back in the presence of the inhabitants and the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not redeem it, then tell me, that I may know, for there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am next after you." And he said, "I will redeem it." Then Boaz said, "On the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also buy it from Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance." And the close relative said, "I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I ruin my own inheritance. You redeem my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it." Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm anything, one man took off his sandals and gave it to the other, and this was a confirmation in Israel. Therefore the close relative said to Boaz, "Buy it for yourself." And he took off his sandal. And Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "You are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech and all that was Chilion and Mahion, and from the hand of Naomi."
Thank you. So there's a lot that happened in those 8 verses. So a quick overview again. We can see that a discussion of inheritance and how they conflict between the 2 close relatives of Naomi, and a discussion between those 2 men. So in this time frame, it is required for the widow of a lineage that the next closest of kin on the male side is supposed to marry that widow in order to help provide for the women. Because culturally, that's how it worked out. Women were cared for by that patriarchal lineage, that family. And we can see that Boaz is trying to ensure that Ruth is properly taken care of. And it's interesting how in this aspect, we can see the choices made between the two men. What's something that sticks out to you guys in their discussion? So, if needed, it starts in verse 5 and 6 mostly.
Boaz wanted to do the right thing.
Okay.
He wanted to make sure that the right thing was done, because the other man, it was his right to purchase first. So
Okay. So we can see that a continuation of a godly character, not just following the law, but following the intent of the law. You can see how that actually matches the pattern of the New Testament, how Christ teaches how you should obey the law. It's not just the law itself to the word, but the intent behind it. So that's an interesting pattern. Anything else? Continuing further down the verses, another interesting part is after the other man admits that he can't redeem that inheritance because it jeopardizes his. An interesting fact in the culture of that time, how does he, I guess, disinherit his opportunity to take Ruth? What choice does he make with Boaz? It's in verse
8.
7. Verse 7. How does he symbolize that he's not going to take Ruth or the inheritance?
Took off his sandals.
So it's the way it was done here was done in a respectful and a non-degrading manner. But in other aspects, that same taking of the sandal is also even done by the widows at the time. So if you look back, especially in Leviticus and other areas, the culture of that time was the widow, if she wasn't, if they didn't follow the law and take the widow in, as was required by the law, she would take her sandal and then give it to that person and then spit in her face as a sign of disgust, as a public shaming for not upholding the law. So you can see here, he chooses to do it himself. He does it in a respectful manner instead of what was culturally done by the widows at the time. So that was just a cool tidbit that I looked through. Seeing how they played out and how it was a positive exchange. Continuing, I'll start looking back in Leviticus here soon. We can see now in verses 17 through 22, you can see that the story concludes in revealing that there's minor family struggles, how they actually impacted continuing the lineage. So if anyone wouldn't mind starting in 17 and reading to 22 of chapter 4.
Also the neighbor woman gave him a name, saying, "There is a son born to Naomi," and they called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now this is the genealogy of Perez. Perez begot Hezron. Hezron begot Ram. Ram begot Amminadab. Amminadab begot Nahshon. And Nahshon begot Salmon. Salmon begot Boaz. Boaz begot Obed. Obed begot Jesse. And Jesse begot David.
Thank you. So going through this quick crash course of the story, what kind of sticks out that's interesting, all the way from the top of? It seems like a horrific events all stacked up. The husbands pass away, the father passes away. It's a barren and empty left Naomi. As she points out in chapter 1, she feels like everything's been lost. She's been emptied by the Almighty. And yet in the end, we can see what what came forth still, even from that? Is there anything interesting or aha kind of moment that sticks out? There's a lot of these for me. If not, then I'll share a few things from Leviticus. Is there anything? Any gears going, Sam?
No, sorry.
No? Is anybody lost? I went kind of fast in that.
Could you restate what you were getting at again?
Yeah. So this story, I'm focusing on the providential aspect of it.
Okay.
So you can see what should have been pretty much a dying off of lineage, father dying, everything else, and the Moabite, Ruth. Typically, she would have gone back to her land. She wouldn't have stayed with the Israelites. But instead, she chose to do what was outside of the norm, and she went with Naomi, with the mother-in-law. And we can see that in the end, the lineage of King David continued. Looking at the end of chapter 4, we can see all the generations that came forth through Boaz and all. Did that clear it up?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Just God is always there, just knowing how to handle each situation and the characteristics of what's happening of the individual. I mean, it might help more if I knew more about the Moabites and the position, and understand more of why they're coming from and why.
Cultural difference.
The cultural difference, yes, thank you. And to have that courage to be a Moabite and to go into this foreign land with your mother-in-law and that different aspects. That might be something that would help me more if I knew more of the background. But to know that they are different. She is a Moabite, she's in this different land, there's a different God, right? That she's not well acquainted with.
Correct. So she's not used to following the Lord of Israel.
Right. And so to then switch, right? Be married to Boaz, right? Is that what happens at the end?
Correct.
Ruth and Boaz to get together, become one, and to accept the God of Israel as her God, right?
Yeah.
So that's a big deal too.
To touch on that, which I was going to get into later as well. So we've identified Ruth is not an Israelite, as a Moabite. In New Testament terminology, what else would that be? If you weren't a Jew, what were you?
Gentile.
Right.
She was a Gentile. And so if you look at now the Old Testament, one of the key books of the Old Testament is not even about an Israelite. It's about how God worked through a Gentile. So there's that key aspect as well, which then furthers on the idea in the New Testament of plan of salvation wasn't just for the Jews, it was for everyone. We can see how God works through a Gentile, even in the Old Testament, to give that plan of salvation through Christ. So those are one of the key things that was highlighted as like an aha for me. I was pretty proud of that one.
Naomi she had taught her also, because she told Naomi that her God would be, your God will be my God. Where you go, I'll go. And so she followed Naomi in that respect too. So I would think Naomi had taught her.
Sure. So continuing on that, it also kind of shows how God doesn't just work through us passively on our side. It's also impacted by our choices. Naomi was probably a key aspect, as you pointed out, in her wanting to be there. And that can be a reflection for us today as well when it comes to God providing for us.
I was thinking of just now I just thought of when Jesus was at the well, right? And the Jews didn't really like the Samaritan people, if I'm not wrong.
Correct.
They treated them very poorly. And they would even go around the city. They would not even go into the city. And Jesus went to the well and is talking to this woman, and the shock that his disciples would have been tremendous. You know, you're with this woman, we avoid these people, but yet, like you said, God uses everyone in the way that needs to happen, I guess as you can express.
Actually, to piggyback off that, if we think about it, so the Samaritans, who were the Samaritans? You know?
I have to revisit all the
Yeah.
details.
Rick?
Half-breed between Jew and Gentile.
So they would come from a Jew and a Gentile parents. And they were shunned because they weren't pure, as a basic overview. And so if you think about it, we can see here the lineage of David comes from pretty much a Samaritan. And yet, King David is viewed as a mighty ruler in Israel in history, but we can see where he comes from that. And it seems to be glazed over by the Israelites in history. And so it's an interesting thought.
Something kind of interesting, I was just looking at the genealogy in Matthew chapter 1, and it's very patriarchal and patrilineal, but there's only 2 women's names listed in that, and Ruth is one of them. So that was very significant.
And that was one of the key aspects that actually made me look into this book. Was starting from that. And so you can see the focus of God had that plan specifically through her. So we'll look at a couple things in Leviticus to kind of give the backstory of why things happened the way they did. So we're looking at Leviticus chapter 25. So Leviticus 25, starting verse 23 through 28. If somebody wouldn't mind reading that, that's going into the redemption of property when somebody is widowed or becomes too poor to handle their property. So Leviticus 25, 23 to 28.
23? Okay.
Correct.
The land shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine, for you are strangers and sojourners with me. And in all the land of your possessions you shall grant redemption of the land. If one of your brethren becomes poor and has sold some of his possessions, and if his redeeming relative comes to redeem him, then he may redeem what his brother sold. Or if the man has no one to redeem it, but he himself becomes able to redeem it, then let him count the years since its sale, and restore the remainder to the man to whom he sold it, that he may return to his possessions. But if he is not able to have it restored to himself, then what was sold shall remain in the hand of him who bought it until the year of Jubilee. And in the Jubilee it shall be released, and he shall return to his possession.
Thank you. So a quick paraphrase of that. But we can see that in God's plan, He encouraged them to follow the law and how it should be dealt with in Ruth's situation. So if we look at it, Ruth lost not only her husband, but her father-in-law and her mother-in-law was widowed. So in that culture and society of the patriarchal taking care, they're not going to be able to take care of the land in that inheritance. They're poor. And we can see how Boaz fills that to a T. He is one of the next nearest relatives. Looking in Leviticus and other versions and looking at the Hebrew, it's also translated as nearest relative. We can see that it's obligated for them to buy it back and keep it within the family at all possible. So we can see how they fulfill that part of the law. Next thing is the marriage aspect, in which we don't have to read through that one. But it's in Deuteronomy 25, starting in 5 through 10. So if you guys wanted to look at that on your own time, it's in Deuteronomy 25. And it goes over that if a man dies without a son, his brother or nearest relative was expected to marry the widow. So that's a key aspect of taking care of the widow and taking care of the family. That you can see continues in Jewish culture, also in the New Testament. The firstborn son of the union would legally carry the deceased man's name to preserve that lineage. So that's how that lineage then continued, following the line of David at the end of Ruth. Another aspect is going to be back in Leviticus 25 again, which we can read through that one. It's pretty short. So Leviticus 25 verses 47 through 49 is the redemption or the purchasing of the freedom of a relative as well. If anyone wouldn't mind reading Leviticus 25 again, starting in verse 47 to 49.
Now if a sojourner or stranger close to you becomes rich, and one of your brethren who dwells by him becomes poor, and sells himself to the stranger or sojourner close to you, or to a member of the stranger's family, after he is sold, he may be redeemed again. One of his brothers may redeem him, or his uncle or his uncle's son may redeem him, or anyone who is near kin to him in his family may redeem him, or if he is able, he may redeem himself. Thus, 49, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So this all serves as a context of what I mentioned before of the legal role of a Gael. So that is a person who, in the English terms, if you look at the Jewish law and the Israelites, they are referred to as a Kinsman-Redeemer. So they help continue the lineage whenever things like this occur, whenever famine or anything else caused a break in the standard way. It's a legal role that was that honestly ended up being a very symbolic bridge to the New Testament portrayal of Christ. So continuing on this, and this is the key point in going into our the invitation, is we can see how the story of Ruth, how it lays out how Christ fulfills the old law, and how he takes care of the church as that heavenly marriage, that holy matrimony. So looking at it as a quick overview again, we can see the near kinship aspect. The Redeemer had to be a blood relative. Boaz was a near kinsman to Naomi, to her deceased husband. And Jesus fulfills this as well. He becomes human and makes himself a near relative in essence. He was the Son of God, but he became the Son of Man. So we can see that bridge and similarity when you look through the story. The ability to pay. So Boaz paid for the inheritance and helped take care of Ruth and the family. Likewise, you can see that the Redeemer had to possess the ability to pay for our salvation, to give us that inheritance, to be with Christ and be with the Father. We can see that Boaz was a man of great wealth and standing. Who was Jesus spiritually? He was sinless, and he was uniquely able to pay for our spiritual debt. He praises the Beatitudes of how to be blessed, even if we're poor, in the physical sense. Blessed are the meek, blessed are the poor in spirit. Focusing instead on that spiritual aspect of it. We can see the willingness to act by Boaz. He chose to marry Ruth despite the complexities, despite the fact that there was another relative that had claim. He chose to act and verify and make sure that she was taken care of. Jesus took care of us. So this whole aspect, I went through a very long commentary. It's fascinating just seeing the similarities they brought up. Jesus laid down his life for us of his own accord. And then that payment as well. The Redeemer had to pay the price in full to finalize our transaction. It was a choice, it was a payment. And following that tradition of the old law and how you pay and take care of your family and of your lineage. Boaz publicly bought back the land in the lineage. Likewise, Jesus didn't do it in secret. He went about preaching the gospel. He collected disciples, and he made followers. And he paid that ransom for humanity. So those are a couple of the symbolic things that stuck out to me. Alongside just the providential aspect. So you can see, in looking at other aspects of how God provided in the Old Testament, it's not just what happened and the result, but even how it was done. So that's something I wanted to push to encourage as you study in different areas, to see the how, not just the why. For example, this could be its own full study. I talked with somebody at my unit this week. He has very similar beliefs, and so I try to encourage him and push him, see if I can get him to come here instead. But he lives in Hot Pepe, so I'm trying to get him to go that far. But a discussion we had was even simply Noah and the ark. So again, not just the what happened, but how it happened and the purpose behind it. When we look through the building of the ark, and I'm encouraged to look into it, the plans for the ark, they don't include a rudder. They don't include a way of navigating yourself. It's just a survival, if you follow exactly what's written down, a flotation device. That's all it is. It's a large one, and it floats well, and it carried all the creation that it was deemed. But we can see how the aspect wasn't for us to take control. So that same providential aspect of God taking care and following His plans there. So that's the theme I wanted to leave off for tonight. Next week, we'll look into Joseph and how God provided for Joseph. For example. Any comments or anything else that comes to mind? I get excited about this, but I don't want to stay too long either for you guys. Anything? Okay. So this is also the time, following what we just went through of how Christ took care of the church, how He built the church, and how He gave that plan of salvation to us, how He paid that debt. We always leave a time for invitation. For anyone who hasn't been able to make that choice yet, to choose to follow Him, or even those that have, those that, in retrospect, realize that we haven't honored that debt. If there's any need or concern or anything that you want brought up in front of the family, now's the time as we stand and as we speak.
655.